In this video, we explore a story you were never meant to hear. The night Rick Sanchez wandered into a universe where even time had fallen asleep, a place beyond invention, beyond adventure, where silence itself seemed alive. This is Rick and Morty Season 8, Episode 7, Rick's Betrayal That Nobody Expected. We're so grateful you're here. This story is for you. A gentle journey through memory, quiet regret, and the kind of peace Rick never thought he could find. Before we begin, take a deep breath, get cozy under your blanket, and let the stars hold you. Now let's begin. He woke to a sound that wasn't really a sound, a soft hum that might have been silence breathing. The ship's monitors blinked faintly, slow and tired, as though they too were dreaming. Rick rubbed his eyes, half expecting the world to start moving again. It didn't. The clock above the control panel had stopped. Not broken, just still. Seconds hung in the air like dust motes caught in twilight. Outside the viewport, galaxies sat frozen mid-turn, their spirals paused like dancers waiting for the next note. Rick stared for a long time, his reflection split between the glass and the stars beyond. "Guess even entropy needs a nap," he muttered. But the words didn't echo. Even sound seemed unsure if it should exist here. For a brief, weightless moment, he wondered if this was death. It didn't feel like it. It felt softer. He stood and looked around the ship. Everything was in its place, the clutter of bottles, scattered notes, the half-built gadgets glowing faintly blue. But something was missing. The usual tension, that restless energy, was gone. It was as if the universe had finally exhaled and forgotten to breathe back in. He walked to the window, fingers brushing the cool glass. "A universe that forgot how to tick," he said quietly. Now that's new. It reminded him of something. A night long ago, a night when Morty couldn't sleep. He could still hear the boy's voice in his mind, small and uncertain. What if dreams are just practice for being okay? Rick hadn't known how to answer then. He probably gave some sarcastic reply. But even now, the memory lingered, clearer than any equation. Morty's voice had always carried that quiet, human gravity, the kind Rick could never quite escape. He looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the echo of exhaustion that never truly left him. Maybe this universe had stopped just so he could notice how tired he was. He checked his wrist device. Dead. Every chronometer, every portal gauge, frozen mid-blink. Yet the faint hum persisted, that low cosmic lullaby that filled the silence between seconds. He walked toward the main console, flipping a few manual switches out of habit. The ship's AI flickered, then dimmed. A single message remained on the screen. Time undefined. State rest. Rick stared at it, then let out a low chuckle. State rest, huh? Yeah, maybe it's about time. He opened a small cabinet beside the seat. Inside was a glass vial, sealed with a faint blue glow. The liquid inside shimmered like moonlight in slow motion. He held it up between his fingers, watching it pulse gently, a fragment of sleep. That's what he'd called it when he created it decades ago, and back when he still thought he could bottle the things he didn't. Understand, peace, rest, forgiveness. He'd never used it. He didn't even remember why. He sat back in his chair and turned the vial slowly, light sliding across his face. The stillness outside pressed closer, as if listening. Somewhere in the silence he heard it, faint footsteps approaching down the ship's corridor. Rick didn't move. He already knew. The door slid open with a whisper, and Morty stepped through. He looked younger. Not the tired version Rick had last seen, not the one who'd been changed by too many realities. This Morty's hair was a little shorter, his eyes softer, still carrying that quiet spark of wonder Rick had nearly forgotten. Rick. Morty's voice trembled slightly. Where are we? Rick glanced over his shoulder. Good question, kid.
I think we're in between moments, Morty blinked. Like...
Time stopped? Rick nodded. Yeah, it's taking a nap.
Can't say I blame it. Morty walked closer to the window, staring out at the motionless stars. It's weird, he whispered.
Everything looks alive, but sleeping. Rick said nothing. For a long while, they just stood there, side by side, staring into the endless stillness. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of breath, of unspoken words, of quiet that felt strangely sacred. Hey, Rick? Morty finally said. Do you think this place is real? Rick smirked faintly. Morty, reality's just the universe's way of keeping score. But this... He gestured at the stars. This feels like mercy, Morty frowned. Mercy? Yeah, Rick said softly. For once, nothing needs fixing. The boy leaned his head against the glass, eyes following a comet frozen mid-flight. Kind of pretty, he said. Like... If dreams could stop moving too fast, Rick smiled, a small, tired, honest smile. Yeah, kid. Maybe that's all this is? The dream that forgot how to hurry. He turned the vial of glowing sleep in his hand, feeling its quiet hum. Somewhere deep inside, a thought stirred, not scientific, not logical, just human. Maybe the betrayal wasn't what he did to others. Maybe it was how long he'd betrayed his own need to rest. The silence deepened. The stars blinked slower. And for the first time in countless lifetimes, Rick let himself sit in it. Really sit. And not fix a thing. The hum became a lullaby. The frozen clock above the console flickered once, as if remembering something, then stayed still again. Morty's breathing softened beside him. The boy had fallen asleep, leaning slightly against Rick's shoulder. Rick looked down, a quiet laugh caught in his throat. Guess the kid figured it out first. He leaned back, eyes tracing the soft blue glow of the vial. The hum of the universe pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Slow, forgiving. And somewhere far beyond, time waited. Patient, kind, for Rick to close his eyes too. When Morty woke, he wasn't sure if he had slept or simply drifted into another kind of waking. The universe still hadn't remembered how to move. Outside, the stars hung like lanterns caught mid-flicker, and the ship hummed its quiet lullaby. The same tone that felt more like a heartbeat than a machine. Rick was already up, tinkering absently with something on the control desk. Not because it needed fixing, just because it gave his hands something to do while his mind softened at the edges. His eyes had that strange distance again, the kind that said he was somewhere far away, even while sitting right there. Morning, Morty murmured, though it wasn't really morning. There was no sun, no time to circle them anymore, just the slow, suspended quiet. Rick didn't look up. Hey, kid. Morty rubbed his eyes and stretched, feeling the weightless calm of this paused reality. So, any luck figuring out what's going on? Rick gave a faint shrug. Universe decided to take 5. I'm not going to argue with it. Morty smiled a little, walking toward the window. It's weird. Feels peaceful, though. Rick made a non-committal sound, twisting a screwdriver between his fingers. Morty turned back toward him, watching the way the soft blue light brushed across Rick's face. It made him look gentler somehow, not younger, not older, just human, like all the noise had finally drained out of him. Rick? Morty asked quietly. Rick sighed. What's up, kid? Morty hesitated, then said the words that had been circling his mind like a slow comet since he'd woken. Do you ever feel like we're just memories replaying themselves? Rick's hand froze mid-turn. The screwdriver stopped, caught between the motion of habit and thought. Slowly, he set it down. Morty fidgeted, almost regretting asking. I mean, I don't know. It just feels like we've done this before. Like we keep finding new universes, new adventures, but they all feel like echoes. Maybe we're not moving forward anymore. Just
Rewatching the same moments over and over, Rick didn't answer at first.
He just looked at him, that long, quiet stare that meant his brain was spinning faster than he'd admit. Finally, he said, "You think maybe that's a bad thing?" Morty shrugged.
I don't know. Maybe it's just sad. Like, what if all the versions of us are just stuck remembering each other?
Rick leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms.
Hate to break it to you, Morty, but that's pretty much how consciousness works. Memory pretending to be progress.
We're all ghosts of our last thought. Yeah, but Morty's voice softened.
Don't you ever wish we could just stop like this?
Just stop running.
Stop fixing.
Stop fighting. He glanced out the window again. It's kind of nice here. Feels like the world's taken a nap, Rick smirked faintly. A cosmic nap. Great episode title, Morty laughed quietly.
I'm serious, Rick. I know, kid. Rick's tone lowered. Not mocking now, but reflective.
You're not wrong. It's
unsettling, isn't it?
How peace feels like something you have to survive. Morty blinked, confused. What do you mean? Rick looked down at his hands.
People like us. We don't know what to do when things stop breaking.
So we start breaking ourselves instead. For a moment, the hum of the ship filled the silence. The sound wasn't mechanical anymore. It was like breathing. Slow, rhythmic, grounding. Morty watched him, eyes soft. You ever get tired of pretending you don't care? Rick chuckled under his breath.
That's a dangerous question, Morty. Yeah, well, this seems like a dangerous place. Rick smiled faintly, shaking his head. You're getting too smart for your own good, kid. Morty looked back at the frozen stars. Maybe it's not about being smart. Maybe it's just noticing things. Rick tilted his head.
Like what? Like how the stars aren't blinking. Morty pointed toward the glass.
It's like they're waiting for us to say something. Rick followed his gaze, studying the sky.
The stars really did seem aware, suspended mid-pulse, like hearts holding their breath. There was something reverent about it, as if the whole universe was listening. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the glowing vial. The fragment of sleep. It shimmered faintly in the ship's dim light. Morty's eyes widened.
That thing again.
What is it, really? Rick rolled it gently between his fingers. It's a memory. The night I tried to bottle rest. Thought if I couldn't sleep, I could at least study it. Did it work? Rick smiled, but there was no humor in it. Define work. I stopped dreaming for a while.
Stopped feeling much of anything.
Guess that counts as success, Morty frowned.
That's kind of sad. Rick looked up, eyes glinting faintly.
Yeah, kid. Turns out some things aren't meant to be solved. They sat in silence for a while after that. The ship's light dimmed a little more, and outside, the frozen galaxies glowed like old candle flames. It was the kind of quiet that made you forget what hurry even meant. Morty leaned back in the seat beside Rick, tucking his knees slightly to his chest. You think it'll ever start again? Time, I mean? Rick exhaled. Eventually, everything wakes up.
Even the broken parts, Morty nodded. And what about you?
Rick raised an eyebrow. What about me? Morty's voice softened. Will you wake up too? Rick looked at him for a long time, eyes tracing the boy's tired innocence. That unshakable faith in a man who never asked for it. Then, instead of answering, he reached forward and pressed a few buttons on the console. The ship's window tinted slightly darker, letting only the faintest starlight through. Close your eyes, Morty, he said quietly.
Doesn't matter if time stopped.
You can still rest. Morty hesitated, then nodded. He leaned back, eyes fluttering shut. What about you? Rick leaned against the chair, the faintest smile pulling at his lips. I'll keep watch. Somebody's got to make sure the universe doesn't start without us. Morty chuckled softly. You say that like it would even dare. Rick watched as Morty's breathing slowed. Calm, steady, peaceful. The boy's head tilted slightly to the side, bathed in the dim glow of starlight. The hum of the ship pulsed gently, syncing with the rhythm of his sleep. For the first time in a long time, Rick didn't feel the urge to move. He didn't reach for another tool or bottle or escape plan. He just sat there, listening to the sound of Morty's breathing, the quiet of a universe learning to rest. Maybe that was the answer Morty was looking for. Maybe they were memories replaying themselves, but tonight at least, it was a good memory. Rick looked once more at the frozen clock. It still hadn't moved, and neither of them minded. The silence inside the ship had taken on its own gravity. It wasn't just quiet anymore, it was alive, as if the air itself was waiting to be remembered. The stars outside glowed faintly, their light pressing against the glass in soft, rhythmic waves, like the pulse of something eternal that had forgotten how to breathe. Rick sat alone at the console. Morty was asleep in the chair beside him, head tilted toward the window, his breath fogging the glass every few seconds. That small sound, the faint rhythm of a child's rest, felt louder than any explosion they'd ever survived. Rick looked down at the vial in his hand again, that same faint, swirling blue light, like a fragment of dream, still trying to wake up. It shimmered quietly, not with energy, but with memory. "Bottle of night," Rick murmured under his breath. "You really held up, huh?" He turned it slowly, watching how the glow bent the shadows around his fingers. It was the only thing that seemed to move in this paused universe, the only thing still alive enough to care. The first time he'd created it, years ago, he hadn't been trying to rest. He'd been trying to erase the hum in his head, erase the faces that drifted in and out of existence, erase the guilt that clung to him like gravity. He had told himself it was a scientific experiment, a study of consciousness, a method of capturing the neurochemical rhythm of REM sleep. But in truth, it had been something more fragile, a desperate attempt to find a place where he could finally stop thinking. And when it worked, when he finally saw what a dream looked like bottled and still, he couldn't stop staring. It wasn't sleep. It wasn't peace. It was something smaller, more dangerous, a fragment of surrender. Rick looked over at Morty again. The kid's breathing was steady, slow, unguarded. It was strange to see someone so young trust the silence. Rick had forgotten how to. He reached for the control dial, absently spinning it between his fingers, though he knew it did nothing now. Time was still paused, maybe forever. Maybe it had paused just for them. The thought sent a quiet ache through him. For once, he didn't feel like fixing it. Outside, the stars began to hum again. Not a sound exactly, but a frequency, like faint whispers pressing through the glass. They shimmered faintly in the blackness, and Rick wondered if maybe the universe was dreaming too. He took a long breath and spoke softly, as though the stars could hear. "You ever think maybe
sleep's the only real universe left?
Everything else just keeps collapsing?" Morty stirred a little, his head moving against the chair, eyes still closed.
What'd you say?"
Rick glanced at him. "Nothing, kid. Go back to sleep." But Morty didn't. His voice, quiet and slurred with drowsiness, floated through the still air.
"Oh, what's that?"
"Glowing thing." Rick hesitated. Then he held it up so Morty could see. "It's a dream." "Well, kind of." Morty blinked slowly, half awake.
"You bottled a dream?"
Rick smirked faintly.
"Yeah, long time ago.
Back when I still thought everything could be contained. Turns out dreams don't like cages." Morty yawned. "What happens if you open it?" Rick looked down at the vial again. "Depends what kind of dream it is." There was a pause. Morty's eyes fluttered open a little, curiosity pushing through his sleepiness.
"So, what kind was it?"
Rick leaned back in his chair, eyes on the glass.
"A bad one?" Morty frowned.
"Why keep it then?" Rick chuckled softly. "Because it's still mine." The ship creaked faintly, metal expanding against invisible time. The hum deepened, almost like a sigh. Rick stood, moving to the window, the vial glowing faintly in his grip. The starlight painted his face in slow blues and silvers, softening the lines time had carved there. Morty watched him through half-open eyes.
Rick, yeah? Do you ever...
Want to sleep? Rick's shoulders tensed.
Can't say I haven't thought about it. I mean really sleep.
Like, not the passed-out kind. The kind where you dream. Rick was quiet for a long time. Dreaming's dangerous, Morty. It's where you start remembering the things you didn't fix. Morty frowned. But maybe that's good. Rick turned slightly. What do you mean? I don't know, Morty said, eyes growing heavier again. Maybe remembering stuff is how we stop it from breaking. Rick looked at him for a long moment. The kid wasn't wrong, not really. But there was a cruel simplicity in that kind of wisdom, the kind that came from someone who hadn't yet lived long enough to drown in it. He turned back to the stars, gripping the vial tighter. You ever think maybe the reason the universe stopped is because it's tired too? Morty mumbled something in his half-sleep. Maybe it just wants you to rest, Rick froze. For a moment, everything inside him stilled. His breath, his thoughts, even the hum of the ship. Morty's words lingered like smoke in the air. Maybe it just wants you to rest. He glanced at the vial one more time. The blue light swirled slowly as if waiting for permission. Then, before he could stop himself, he twisted the cap. A faint click echoed through the ship. The air shifted. The stars flickered. Blue light spilled from the vial like liquid moonlight, pooling across the floor, spilling upward into the cabin. It moved like water and smoke at once, curling, breathing, expanding. Morty stirred, eyes fluttering as the light brushed across his face. Rick stepped back, heart thudding slow but deep. The light wasn't blinding. It was soft, like the warmth that fills a room after laughter. It drifted toward him, touched his chest, and sank through. For the first time in what felt like centuries, Rick felt his body release. The ache behind his eyes dissolved. The tightness in his chest loosened. The hum in his head went quiet. He realized he'd forgotten what silence inside himself felt like. Morty opened his eyes fully now, staring at the blue haze surrounding them.
Rick, what's happening?
Rick smiled faintly, the kind of smile that's half apology, half relief.
I think...
We're finally dreaming. The ship dimmed. The stars outside pulsed once. Then again, slower this time. The light wrapped around them both, soft and weightless, like the universe had drawn a blanket over their shoulders. Morty yawned.
Are we safe?
Rick looked at him, eyes gentler than Morty had ever seen. Yeah, kid, for once. We're safe. The vial, now empty, floated upward, dissolving into threads of light. Each strand curved through the air and disappeared into the stars outside. The hum of the ship faded into the quietest kind of peace. The kind that doesn't end, only deepens. Rick leaned back against his chair. His eyelids felt heavy, not from exhaustion, but from release. Morty leaned against his arm, drifting again into sleep. And for the first time since the beginning of everything, Rick let himself follow. No machines, no equations, no escape, just stillness. The stars began to move again, slow, hesitant, like stretching after a long rest. Time began to breathe. And in the quiet heart of the ship, two figures slept, held by the universe that had finally decided to pause with them. The bottle was gone, but its dream remained. The hum of the ship returned like a heartbeat rediscovered, soft, measured, slow. The light from the emptied vial still lingered faintly across the cabin, brushing the metal in waves of pale blue, as if memory itself had refused to leave. Rick sat at the console again, his eyes half open, though he wasn't sure if he was awake anymore. The lines between dreaming and being had begun to blur. Maybe that was the point. Morty stirred beside him, rubbing his eyes.
Rick, what just happened?
Rick didn't answer right away. He was watching something outside the viewport, a faint shimmer in the darkness.
Not stars this time, but shelves.
Thousands of them drifting through the void like suspended architecture, glowing softly in the dark. It looked like a library, one that stretched forever. He muttered, "That's new." Morty leaned closer, squinting.
A library? In space?
Rick's hand hovered over the ship's controls.
Not just any library, Morty. That... He paused, brow furrowing as the ship slowly approached the structure. That's me, Morty blinked.
"What do you mean you?" Rick didn't respond. The ship glided through the mist of light, and the shelves came into focus. Each row filled not with books, but glass bottles.
Some small, some the size of planets.
All softly glowing in different colours. Some blue like the one he'd opened earlier, some gold, some so dim they seemed nearly empty. Morty whispered, What are those?" Rick's voice lowered. "Dreams." He guided the ship down onto a small platform, the engines sighing into silence. When the doors opened, the air smelled like static and nostalgia. Warm, electric, and heavy with things half remembered. They stepped out together. The space inside the archive wasn't still. The bottles floated slightly, rotating in slow, perfect synchronization. Every turn made the glass hum, soft notes of lullabies that had been forgotten by their singers. Morty stared up in awe.
"This is beautiful, Rick. Did you build this?"
Rick's jaw clenched. "Yeah, a long time ago," Morty frowned, glancing around.
"Why? What's it for?"
Rick took a slow breath, his gaze tracing the endless shelves. "These are the nights I gave up."
"Every time I told myself I didn't need sleep. Every time I thought I could outwork the universe." He stopped, voice almost cracking.
"I stored them here." Morty looked up at one of the bottles near him. It glowed faintly purple. Inside, clouds swirled like nebulae and faint shapes. Silhouettes of Rick and Morty moved across a landscape that didn't exist anywhere real. "Can I touch it?" Rick nodded absently. Morty reached out and laid his hand against the glass. It was warm. And then for a fraction of a second he heard something. A laugh. Rick's laugh. "Lighter, softer, Rick," Morty said quietly.
"I think this one's a happy dream." Rick's expression didn't change.
Some of them were. Most weren't. They walked deeper between the aisles. Each bottle seemed to hum differently. Some like sighs, some like whispers. The glow from their shelves reflected faintly across Rick's face, and Morty could see every emotion flickering there. Pride, regret, exhaustion, longing. It wasn't a scientist walking through his creation. It was a man walking through his ghosts. Morty's voice broke the silence.
"Do you ever open them?"
Rick shook his head. "No. Once you take sleep apart, it doesn't fit back together right." Morty touched another bottle, smaller this time, green and trembling like liquid glass. "And why keep them at all?" Rick hesitated. Then, almost to himself, he said, "Because if I threw them away, I'd have to admit I needed them." The air seemed to grow heavier. Far above them, the bottles shimmered brighter for a moment, as if they'd heard him, then dimmed again. They kept walking until the shelves opened into a wide chamber at the heart of the archive. Here, the bottles floated freely in the air, circling slowly like planets around an invisible sun. In the center, a massive one spun, easily taller than both of them. It pulsed with deep crimson light. Morty stepped closer. "What's that one?" Rick didn't move. His voice came out low.
"That's the night I stopped sleeping." Morty turned.
"When was that?" Rick's gaze was fixed on the bottle. "The night your mom was born." Morty's eyes softened. Oh, the silence after that wasn't awkward. It was sacred, the kind that held meaning too heavy for words. The crimson bottle throbbed faintly and Rick finally stepped forward, placing his palm against its surface. The glass vibrated beneath his touch, and his reflection rippled, dozens of versions of himself flickering in the glow, each one older, sadder, more mechanical. He whispered, "You ever look back and realize you've been trying to fix the same mistake for decades?" Morty said softly, "I think..."
"Everyone does, Rick, just not forever." Rick's hand fell to his side.
He stared at the floor. Yeah, well, forever's kind of my thing. He turned abruptly, walking away, but Morty stayed by the bottle a little longer. He could see faint shapes moving inside, a woman's silhouette, then a baby's, then Rick, much younger, sitting in silence beside them both. The image faded before Morty could speak. He looked after Rick, who was already a few rows away, standing beneath a cluster of dim bottles.
Rick, what's wrong with these ones?
Rick's shoulders sagged. Those are the dreams I lost. They leaked out. Once a dream escapes, it doesn't come back. It just floats off into the void, forgotten. Morty approached one. The glass was cracked. No light came from it, only faint echoes of static. He reached toward it, but Rick stopped him gently. Don't, Rick said.
They hurt, Morty nodded.
They stood there in the low glow, surrounded by all the nights Rick had traded for invention, for escape, for noise. Finally, Morty asked, Rick, do you ever regret it? All of this? Rick's eyes softened, not with anger, but with fatigue. Every genius builds a monument to their mistakes, Morty. This just happens to be mine. He reached into his coat and pulled out another vial, the empty one from before. It still glowed faintly, as if remembering what it had once held. Rick stared at it, then looked around at the shelves. I think it's time I stopped collecting. Morty tilted his head. What do you mean? Rick didn't answer. He placed the empty vial on one of the shelves. As soon as it touched the surface, the entire archive shimmered. The hum deepened.
Light rolled across every bottle, brighter now. Not blinding, but cleansing, like the final breath before dawn. Morty stepped back, watching the glow ripple through the endless aisles. Rick, what's happening?
Rick smiled faintly. Dreams remember when they're forgiven. The bottles vibrated softly, releasing faint trails of light that rose into the air like glowing dust. They drifted upward, passing through the ceiling, vanishing into the cosmos above. The room grew lighter, emptier, but freer. Rick exhaled slowly, the weight on his chest finally shifting. Guess it's time I stopped hoarding my insomnia. Morty looked at him.
You mean you're gonna start sleeping again?
Rick looked toward the stars visible through the ceiling's glass. We'll see. He started walking back toward the ship. Morty followed, the echo of soft chimes following them like a fading lullaby. As the doors closed behind them, the library dimmed one last time, shrinking into a single point of light in the distance. For the first time, Rick didn't look back. He sat in the pilot's chair, eyes half closed, and let out a long, slow sigh. Morty, he said softly, if I forget how to rest again. Remind me of this place. Morty smiled faintly. Yeah, Rick, I will. Outside, the universe moved again, one slow heartbeat at a time. The ship drifted through a sea of muted starlight, a twilight expanse where colors no longer shimmered, only sighed. Rick sat wordless at the controls, and Morty watched him, wondering if the silence between them was heavier than the void outside. After the dream archive faded behind them, something had changed. The air in the ship felt lighter, yet lonelier, like a room that had been cleaned of ghosts, but not of memory. Rick, Morty said softly, where are we going now? Rick's eyes stayed on the faint horizon of space. Oh, there's one more place I need to see. The ship's engines murmured low, carrying them through drifting dust that glowed faintly. Not like fire, but like the residue of forgotten dreams. Morty leaned against the window and saw, far ahead, a planet rising in the dark. It was small and dim, bathed in a soft lavender hue, almost like it had fallen asleep mid-orbit. As they approached, the navigation screens flickered with faint readings.
No life signs. No movement. Only quiet. Rick's voice dropped to a whisper.
I used to think this place didn't exist anymore. Morty frowned. What is it? Rick hesitated. Then, home, sort of. The ship descended through a layer of thin, glimmering clouds, landing gently on a stretch of pale sand that shimmered like powdered glass. When the doors opened, the air outside was warm and slow, the kind of warmth that clings softly to your skin, asking nothing in return. Morty stepped out first, blinking. The sky was endless dusk, no sun, no moon, just a faint violet glow that never faded. In the distance stood small cottages made of stone and metal, patched together like memories. Thin trails of smoke drifted lazily from their chimneys. "Whoa," Morty whispered.
"People live here?" Rick stepped beside him.
"Not people."
"Not anymore." Morty turned, but before he could ask, a figure emerged from one of the cottages.
It was Rick, older, slower, the same eyes but calmer. The other Rick looked at them with quiet recognition, as though expecting this visit. "Well," the older Rick said, his voice carrying the faint rasp of age, "you finally came back." Morty blinked.
Rick? That's you." Rick didn't answer.
His gaze stayed locked with the elder version, like two reflections meeting across decades. The older Rick smiled faintly. "You still running, huh?" Rick crossed his arms.
"I don't run." "Sure you don't," the elder said, gesturing toward the cottages. "Come on."
"You might as well see what you've been avoiding." They followed him down a small path lined with soft, glowing plants that hummed faintly as they brushed past. Morty noticed there were others here too. Versions of Rick, sitting quietly outside their homes, some reading, some tending tiny gardens, some staring at the sky like they were waiting for a sign they already knew wouldn't come. Each of them looked content. "Tired but content," Morty whispered. "Rick!"
"These are all you?"
Rick nodded slowly. "Every version that stopped. Every Rick who quit before the multiverse did." They passed a group of Ricks sitting around a small fire, talking in low tones. One of them laughed softly, a sound Morty had never really heard from his Rick. Not sarcastic, not sharp, just genuine. The older Rick who led them smiled faintly. "We call this place Still Point. A few of us made it here after the last collapse. Got tired of fixing universes that didn't ask to be fixed." Morty turned to his Rick. "You could stay here, you know."
"You don't have to keep—" Rick cut him off gently.
"Not yet, Morty." The elder Rick stopped in front of a small cabin near the edge of a cliff that overlooked a glowing ocean. The water didn't move like normal waves, it pulsed slowly like breathing. The air shimmered faintly with warmth. "This was yours," the elder said softly. "Or will be. Depending on how you look at it." Rick stepped inside. The cabin was simple. A single bed, a shelf lined with books, a few tools on a table. Everything coated in a layer of quiet. A photo frame sat on the nightstand, a blurry image of him and Morty, both smiling, not posing, just caught in a moment. Rick reached out and touched it. Morty stepped closer. "When was that?" Rick didn't answer. His fingers trembled slightly against the glass. "Doesn't matter. Might not even be real." The elder Rick leaned against the doorframe. "Everything's real somewhere, kid."
"Even peace." Morty looked around the room, then at the older Rick. "You."
"You're happy here?" The old man smiled, his eyes shining with something between light and memory. "Happy's not the word."
"I'm quiet."
"You'd be surprised how much that means after eternity." Rick turned to him. "So what, you just stopped? No inventions, no adventures, no noise?" The elder interrupted. "You can't keep filling silence forever, Rick. Eventually it fills you." Rick didn't respond. He walked to the window and looked out at the horizon. Endless lavender, dotted with faint lights from the other cottages. Somewhere far away, a soft melody drifted through the air. A lullaby carried by the wind. Morty tilted his head. "What's that sound?" The elder Rick smiled. "One of us built a music box that runs on memory. It plays when we think about something we've forgiven." Rick stared out the window, his voice low.
"That must mean it never stops," the elder chuckled softly.
"You'd be surprised how quiet it gets when you stop trying to forgive the past and just let it rest." Rick turned back toward him, a faint smirk ghosting across his face. "You always were the sentimental version." "And you always were the stubborn one," the elder replied gently. They looked at each other for a long moment, not with rivalry, but with recognition. Two lives intersecting across the quiet of infinity. Finally, Morty spoke. "Rick, what if this is what you need?" Rick's gaze softened. "Morty, I'm not built for stillness." "Maybe not," Morty said, but
maybe stillness was built for you." Rick stared at him. At the sincerity in his eyes, the same look that had followed him through countless universes, countless mistakes.
Then he turned back toward the window, where the sea of light breathed beneath the lavender sky. The elder Rick straightened, his silhouette framed by the fading glow. "You'll come back one day." "When you're ready," Rick nodded slowly. "Maybe." They stepped outside again. The sky deepened into darker purple, the first stars beginning to blink. Not harshly, but like soft reminders that the universe still remembered them. As they walked back toward the ship, Morty looked around at the quiet cottages, at the versions of Rick who had found peace, who had built small lives out of stillness. "Do you think you'll ever stop, Rick?" he asked. Rick didn't answer immediately. Then, after a long pause, "I think stopping's just another kind of motion, Morty." "Maybe one day I'll learn it," Morty smiled faintly. "I think you're already learning." The ship's door closed behind them with a hush.
Engines hummed softly to life.
As they rose into the dark, Morty looked down at the small planet shrinking beneath them, the glowing cottages, the lavender sea, the Ricks who had chosen rest. Rick stared out at the stars, expression unreadable. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't look lost.
Just quiet. And in the reflection on the glass,
Morty could swear he saw it, not his Rick. Not the stubborn genius or the broken man, but the faintest flicker of the one who would, someday, stop running. The ship disappeared into the twilight, leaving the planet of forgotten Ricks behind, glowing softly, endlessly, like the last heartbeat of a dream that refused to fade. The ship glided through the dark like a single breath exhaled by the stars. For the first time in what felt like forever, neither Rick nor Morty spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of something slow and sacred, like a pulse that had been hidden beneath the noise all along. Morty sat curled up in the co-pilot seat, eyes heavy. The lavender glow from the planet they had left still lingered faintly on the ship's hull, like memory clinging to skin. Outside, the constellations stretched endless and quiet, but they didn't twinkle. They rested. Rick's hand hovered over the controls, but he wasn't really flying. The ship was moving on its own, guided by inertia, and whatever soft current runs through tired men when they've stopped pretending to know where they're going. For a long while, the only sound was the low hum of the engine. Then Rick glanced over and realized Morty was asleep. He was slumped against the side of the seat, mouth slightly open, face lit by the faint reflection of starlight. His breathing was deep, steady, like waves on a planet with no storms. A lock of hair fell over his forehead, and for some reason, Rick didn't push it away, he just watched. He realized something strange. The ship seemed quieter when Morty slept, as though the entire vessel had tuned itself to his breathing. The stars outside even looked softer, their edges blurred, glowing in rhythm with his chest. Rick leaned back. For once, he didn't feel the itch to pour another drink, to build something pointless, to make a joke that hid an ache. He just listened, and in that hush, he noticed it. A faint, slow sound, like wind moving through a sleeping forest. But there was no wind in space. No air, no trees. Just the hum of cosmic stillness. He frowned, then smiled faintly.
"You've got to be kidding me," he whispered.
The damn universe is snoring, but it wasn't snoring. It was breathing. He turned the sensors on low. The readings flickered softly, gravitational waves pulsing in time with some unseen rhythm. A gentle oscillation of matter like the cosmos itself was inhaling and exhaling. Every planet, every star, every atom, all moving together in one vast, invisible breath. Rick whispered, "It's
asleep." He leaned back in his chair, staring into the velvet dark.
He'd always studied the universe as if it were a puzzle to solve, something mechanical, predictable, fixable. But right now it didn't feel like a machine. It felt alive, dreaming. He thought of the Ricks on Still Point, sitting by their small fires. He thought of the older version of himself, content with silence. Maybe this was what they'd found. The heartbeat beneath the equations, the dream beneath the data. For the first time, Rick didn't want to wake the universe. He wanted to let it rest. Morty stirred in his sleep, murmuring something, a half-formed word that sounded like home. Rick's chest tightened. He turned away, staring out into the dark, but his voice softened when he finally spoke. "Yeah, you know, kid."
"Maybe you've got the right idea." He reached over and dimmed the ship's lights even further.
The cabin sank into shadow, illuminated only by the faint pulse of the cosmos outside. The hum of the engines became softer, slower, sinking to that same universal rhythm. He whispered to himself, almost as if afraid to disturb the dream. "You ever think the universe dreams of us, Morty? Maybe we're the stuff it thinks about before drifting off again." Morty didn't answer. He was deep in the kind of sleep that children fall into, trusting, weightless, safe.
Rick envied that.
For all his genius, for all his universes, he couldn't build something that peaceful. He closed his eyes for a moment.
Not to sleep, not yet, but to listen.
In the distance, he could hear faint echoes, like lullabies carried across galaxies. The background radiation of old stars dying, whispering their stories into the void. The quiet hiss of planets turning without witnesses. The slow rhythm of time collapsing softly into itself. It was all so calm. For once he didn't want to understand it. He just wanted to be part of it. A fragment of dust in a sleeping dream. Minutes blurred into hours.
Or maybe seconds. Out here, time moved like breath, unnoticed, until it stopped.
Rick's thoughts drifted. He imagined the universe as a living mind, filled with billions of tiny neurons. Each star a thought, each world a memory. Maybe that's why creation looked so chaotic, because dreaming always does. He smiled faintly. Guess we're all just firing synapses in some cosmic REM cycle, huh? The ship coasted silently through a region of faint blue light. A nebula shaped like a hand reaching upward. Its fingers glowed softly, and Rick swore he saw them move, curling gently, as if tucking the stars beneath a blanket of light. He almost laughed. Even the damn nebula's tucking itself in. He looked over at Morty again. The kid smiled in his sleep. Rick whispered, "Yeah, sweet dreams, kid." He stood slowly, stretching his back, and walked to the observation window. Beyond it, the stars stretched endlessly, but they weren't cold tonight. They looked like candles flickering in an unseen room, watched over by something vast and kind. Rick placed his palm against the glass. It was cold, but he could feel a vibration beneath it. That same steady breathing, that universal heartbeat. Maybe it wasn't peace.
Maybe it was just exhaustion. But it was beautiful. He exhaled slowly,
matching the rhythm. Inhale, exhale. The ship responded, humming softer, as though it too wanted to sleep. And, for the first time in his life, Rick didn't feel smaller than the universe. He didn't feel like a man lost inside it. He felt like part of its pulse, a note in its lullaby. a neuron in its dream. He whispered, almost tenderly, "Guess even infinity needs a nap sometimes." Morty shifted again, muttering something incoherent, and Rick smiled. He returned to his seat, set the autopilot, and leaned back. Outside, the stars blinked slower now, fewer and fewer, as though closing their eyes one by one. The hum of existence softened, the dark thickened, and in that endless quiet, Rick finally allowed his eyes to close, not in defeat, but in surrender, not as an escape, but as belonging. He didn't know if he'd ever wake again. But maybe that wasn't the point, because somewhere, far beyond reason, the universe dreamed. And in that dream, for a single, infinite moment, Rick Sanchez was at peace. The ship entered a quiet part of the galaxy, a place Rick had never charted, though some part of him knew it already. There was no starlight here, only a faint, golden haze drifting like breath over dark water. The instruments showed nothing, no planets, no radiation, not even dust. Just warmth. Morty rubbed his eyes, still groggy from sleep. Grandpa Rick?
Where are we? This doesn't look like anything. Rick didn't answer.
His eyes were fixed on the viewport, on something forming out of that shimmering haze, a shape, slow and soft, coalescing like memory turning into form. At first, it looked like a trick of light, then like a reflection, then like someone standing there, watching him. A woman. Her body wasn't solid. She glowed faintly like moonlight caught in water. The edges of her figure wavered gently, like she was made from the same warm particles that filled the air around them. She didn't move toward the ship, and yet Rick felt as if she had been waiting. Morty looked from her to Rick, whispering, "Do you
know her?"
Rick didn't speak for a long time. Then quietly, too quietly, he said, "Yeah, I think so." The ship drifted closer without him touching the controls. The woman's face came into focus, and Morty could see the lines of kindness drawn faintly across it. She didn't look young, but she didn't look old either. She looked timeless, like someone who had existed before sorrow had names. Rick stood slowly, his hand pressed against the glass.
"It's her," he murmured.
Morty frowned. "Who?" Rick hesitated, then sighed, the sound breaking softly. "Someone who used to remind me I was human." Outside, the woman tilted her head. Her eyes glowed with the color of sunrise. And even though her lips didn't move, Morty heard her voice. Not in sound, but inside his mind. "You've gone too long without rest, Rick." Rick swallowed hard. "Don't start with that," he muttered. "You're not even real. Everything that haunts you is real enough," the voice replied gently. "You just forgot to keep listening." The ship dimmed as if to honor her presence. Morty stepped back, feeling like he'd wandered into something sacred. He'd seen Rick talk to gods, aliens, ghosts, but never like this.
Never this soft. Rick's voice dropped low, breaking apart between breaths. "I never meant to leave you behind." "You didn't leave me," the light answered.
"You left yourself." Morty glanced between them, whispering, "Rick, what's going on?" Rick turned to him, eyes glimmering with something unguarded. "She was before you, Morty, before the portal gun, before all of it."
"I thought I lost her when I started chasing infinity."
"Guess she was waiting in the one place I never looked." Morty stared at the woman, or whatever she was. "Why does she look
like that?"
Rick smiled faintly. "Because I remember her that way. She's light. She's memory without pain." The woman moved closer, her form brightening until it filled the viewport. The golden haze spilled into the ship, wrapping around them like warmth you can't describe. Morty felt calm wash over him, a quiet so deep it almost made him cry. Rick, though, stood completely still. His face looked carved out of every emotion he'd ever refused to feel. He whispered, "I never fixed it, you know."
"Any of it? You weren't supposed to," the voice said.
"You were supposed to forgive yourself." Rick let out a shaky laugh.
Yeah, well, that's not exactly in my programming. She stepped closer, her hand glowing against the glass, mirroring his own. Light met skin.
Morty could see Rick's reflection, his eyes wide, his mask gone. Do you remember? Rick said quietly. That night we built the telescope from soda cans and mirror shards. You said the universe was full of things that didn't need fixing, that sometimes beauty is just the sound of something breaking softly. Her light pulsed once, like a heartbeat.
And you laughed, she whispered.
You said you'd fix even that, Rick's breath trembled.
And I tried. I know. The ship began to hum. The kind of sound that comes not from machinery, but from emotion made physical.
Morty watched, unsure whether to speak, whether to exist in this moment that didn't feel meant for him. He finally sat down quietly, hugging his knees as if to give them privacy. Rick leaned closer to the glass. Why now? Why here? Because even stars need to remember where they came from, the voice said. And because you're tired, Rick. You've been running so long, even your shadow fell asleep. He shook his head, tears threatening but refusing to fall. You don't know how many versions of me there are, how many universes I've wrecked trying to forget this one. I know all of them, she said, her light softening. Every version of you carries the same silence inside. It's not guilt. It's love that never found a place to rest. For a long time, Rick couldn't move. His hand stayed against the glass, trembling slightly. Then he whispered, "You forgive me." The woman's light flickered, growing brighter, and in that shimmer Morty could swear he saw her smile. There was nothing to forgive. The glow began to fade. Rick reached out as if to stop it, but his fingers met only cold glass and empty air. The warmth receded, the haze thinning until only the stars remained. Distant, blinking, real again. Morty stood beside him, voice hushed.
Rick, are you okay?
Rick didn't look away. His voice came out small, raw. She was real once.
Or maybe I just wanted her to be.
Doesn't matter. She was what I lost when I started believing I could outthink love. Morty hesitated, then gently said, You still can love though, right?
Like, you still have that. Rick laughed softly, not bitterly this time, but quietly, like a sigh.
Yeah, kid, maybe I do. Maybe that's the part that keeps coming back. They stood together at the window, watching the light finally dissolve into the void. For a moment, the universe felt like it was holding its breath again. Rick whispered, She never said goodbye. Morty looked up at him. Maybe she didn't have to. The ship drifted on through the endless dark, quieter than before, softer somehow, like the whole of creation had lowered its voice in respect. Rick sat back in his chair, wiping at his eyes, pretending not to. Morty didn't mention it. They said nothing for a long time, just watched. Outside, the last flicker of light faded into the sleeping stars. And in that final glimmer, Rick thought he heard her voice one last time, not in words, but in warmth. Rest. The ship had been quiet for a long time. Too long, maybe. The kind of silence that feels like it's listening, a silence heavy enough to carry memory. After the light woman faded, Rick didn't say a word for hours. He just sat there, watching the space outside the viewport fold into slow streams of color. Every now and then he'd reach for something invisible, a gesture of habit, of regret, then let his hand fall again. Morty didn't try to talk. He'd learned something over the years. Sometimes silence is the conversation. And tonight, it felt sacred. They were drifting through the cosmic field of what Rick called sleep matter, the residue of forgotten dreams. Threads of soft blue light trailed behind the ship, winding and unraveling like thought itself. When the engines dimmed to half power, the hum lowered into a heartbeat rhythm. Morty lay on the floor beside the control panel, watching faint motes of light rise and dissolve above him. He thought of his mom, of the nights she used to sing. The melody had no name, no words, just a quiet hum, like the echo of a wish. He didn't remember it clearly, but the rhythm was still somewhere deep in his body, like a pulse that had never stopped. And before he realized what he was doing, Morty began to hum it. It started low and shy, just breath and vibration, a tune that wavered between comfort and sorrow. Rick's head lifted slightly. He didn't turn around, didn't speak, but he heard it. The hum carried across the metal floor, through the wires, into the control circuits. The ship, like a creature listening, responded. Panels along the walls flickered gently, syncing with the rhythm. Soft blue lights pulsed in time with Morty's tune. The entire vessel began to breathe. Rick leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "You know," he said quietly, "that frequency's hitting exactly 324 hertz. Same resonance as REM drift."
He stopped mid-sentence.
Morty looked up at him, smiling faintly.
"I'm not trying to fix anything, Rick. Just humming." Rick huffed a half-laugh through his nose.
"Yeah, well, guess not everything needs fixing." The sound filled the cabin again, no longer lonely, but alive. It wasn't just Morty anymore. The ship had joined in, translating hums into harmonic echoes, like hundreds of small hearts whispering the same song. Rick closed his eyes. He let the melody wash through him, smoothing out the edges of his thoughts. For once his mind didn't race toward equations or regrets.
It just drifted. He could almost see it, a field of stars pulsing in rhythm like fireflies in deep water.
Each glow a heartbeat, each pause a breath. Morty's hum wasn't music. It was memory breathing out, Rick said softly. "Your mom used to sing that, didn't she?" Morty nodded. "Yeah, when I couldn't sleep, I'd pretend I was asleep, but I'd listen." It felt like she was keeping time with the universe. Rick smiled faintly. She always was good at that. Keeping time. For a moment, they were both quiet again. The hum went on, gentler now, rounder, like a lullaby written for the stars. Morty said after a while, "Hey, Rick." "Yeah? Do you ever get tired of running?" Rick didn't open his eyes.
"Running's all I've ever done." "Yeah," Morty said. "But what happens when you stop?"
Rick sighed. Not the usual sharp kind, but slow, like air leaving a balloon that doesn't want to float anymore. "You find out what hurts," he said. "And you find out it doesn't have to." Morty smiled at that, and the hum deepened. Soft waves now rolling through the ship's systems. Every surface reflected faint silver ripples. It was as if the universe itself had joined the lullaby. Outside the viewport, the dream field began to shimmer. Countless glowing filaments connecting like constellations that didn't exist before. They stretched and pulsed in rhythm with the tune, each beat sending a pulse of quiet light across infinity. Rick opened his eyes, finally watching. He muttered under his breath, "Huh? Guess even the cosmos likes a good melody." Morty chuckled. "Maybe it's just lonely too." Rick stared out at the glowing network of dreams. "Maybe it's not lonely," he said softly. "Maybe it's listening." He reached out, pressing a few buttons on the console. Instead of changing course, the ship began recording the resonance, syncing it with the external field. The data scrolled across the screen, waves of light mapped like fingerprints. Morty tilted his head. "What are you doing?" Rick shrugged, eyes distant. "Just saving it. The sound, the frequency. It's the first time the ship's felt peaceful." The hum continued. The dream field glowed brighter. For the first time in longer than either of them could remember, there was no sense of danger, no pending disaster, no interdimensional emergency. Just warmth, just sound. Rick closed his eyes again. He leaned his head back against the chair and let himself drift into that sound, into the memory it carried. He saw glimpses of his daughter's face, the smell of a small kitchen at dusk, the laughter that used to echo through old hallways. He felt something uncoil inside him, something small and human that had been hiding for too long. Morty finished humming and looked up. "You awake?" Rick didn't open his eyes.
"Barely," he murmured. "That song's dangerous, kid."
"You keep that up, you might make the universe too calm." Morty grinned.
"Maybe it needs that." Rick cracked one eye open.
"Maybe we all do." The ship dimmed to half light again. Outside, the glowing threads of dream energy slowly dissolved back into the void, leaving faint after-images like starlight behind closed eyes. Morty whispered, "It's weird. The quiet feels good." Rick nodded. "Yeah, that's how you know it's real." For a while, neither moved. Rick dozed off in his chair, head tilted, arms crossed, a faint smirk still on his face. Morty watched him for a moment, then turned toward the viewport. The stars blinked lazily. A few of them flickered in rhythm, as if they were still singing back. Morty smiled to himself and whispered, "Good night."
"Rick." The ship hummed softly in reply, and somewhere, deep within its circuitry,
the lullaby kept looping, gentle, eternal, like a memory that refused to fade. The ship landed softly, without sound, as if the planet itself had exhaled to welcome them. Outside the viewport stretched a landscape that shimmered like sleep. The air was warm but light, filled with drifting sand that rose instead of fell. It spiraled upward in slow ribbons of gold, caught in invisible currents that reached toward the pale sky. The sun here didn't burn. It simply glowed like an ember that refused to fade. Morty blinked at the sight.
"The sand's going up," he whispered. Rick smirked faintly.
"Yeah, gravity's on vacation here. The planet's caught in a temporal loop. Every grain of sand remembers falling once, so now it's just returning." They stepped out together. The ground beneath them was soft and humming, almost alive. Every footprint they left began to rise, the grains drifting away like sighs. Morty wandered forward, his shoes leaving trails of suspended dust. He squinted toward the horizon.
"What is this place?"
Rick's voice was quieter than usual.
"I called it the Hourglass Garden."
"Built it once." "Forgot why?" Morty looked at him, surprised. "You built a planet?" Rick shrugged. "More like cultivated it." Mix physics with nostalgia. It's the only place where time moves how you feel it, not how it's measured. Morty frowned. "How you feel it?" Rick picked up a handful of sand, watching it lift out of his palm. When you're happy, the sand slows down. When you're sad, it rises faster. Everything reacts to emotion, not clocks. Morty stood silently for a moment, watching grains swirl around him like fireflies.
"That's kind of beautiful, Rick." Rick smirked again, half-hearted.
"Beauty's just math you don't understand yet." But his tone didn't match the words. There was something soft in his eyes, something like pride and regret intertwined. They walked together until they reached a ridge overlooking the garden. Below, dunes moved like waves in reverse, and the whole world seemed to breathe upward. In the center of it all stood a colossal glass tower, shaped like an hourglass, but hollow inside. Instead of sand, threads of light flowed gently between its chambers, rising and falling in rhythm. Morty stared in awe. "What is that?" Rick hesitated.
"That's me, I guess."
"Every moment I ever wanted to undo." Morty turned to him. "What do you mean?" Rick took a deep breath, hands in his pockets.
"Every mistake, every what if, every second I wished I could take back, I kept them here."
"Each particle's a regret. I thought if I could study them long enough, I could fix everything." Morty was quiet. Then softly, "Did it work?" Rick's voice dropped to almost nothing. "No, because the moment you trap time, you stop living it." The wind shifted, if it could be called wind, and the sand around them shimmered with new intensity. Morty crouched down, scooping a handful. The grains glowed faintly, then rose from his fingers, drifting upward like tiny lanterns. They looked like Little souls, he said. Rick tilted his head. Close enough.
Every one of them's a moment that didn't want to end, Morty smiled faintly. Kind of like you, huh?
Rick didn't respond. His eyes followed the grains until they disappeared into the bright sky. Then he muttered, "You ever notice, Morty, how everything I build is just a different way of not sleeping?" Morty laughed softly. "Yeah, I guess so. You invent time loops instead of taking naps." Rick smiled too, faintly, but his gaze stayed distant. "Yeah, well, maybe it's time I learned how." They stood side by side for a long while, saying nothing. The hum of the sand filled the air like music from another life. Morty started stacking bits of floating sand together, shaping them into little towers that shimmered as they rose. The towers trembled and drifted upward, dissolving before they reached eye level. Rick watched him, amused. "You know, those'll never last, right?" "Yeah," Morty said. "But that's not the point." Rick arched an eyebrow.
"Oh, what's the point, Philosopher Morty?"
Morty shrugged, smiling. "I don't know. It just feels nice to build something that doesn't have to stay." Rick looked at him. Really looked at him. The boy who'd once been all nerves and noise, now calm in the middle of a world where even gravity listened to feelings. He whispered, half to himself, "Guess you're getting smarter." Morty grinned. "Nah, just tired of fixing things that aren't broken." The words landed softly between them, like a blanket settling over an old ache. Rick said nothing. He simply watched the horizon, the way the light twisted through the hourglass tower, the way the air shimmered like a living dream. His reflection flickered across the glass surface, older than he remembered, gentler somehow. Morty lay down on the rising sand, arms folded behind his head. The ground lifted him slowly, buoyed by invisible warmth. "Hey, Rick?" "Yeah?"
"You think time forgives us?"
Rick chuckled dryly.
"Time doesn't care, kid."
"But if you're lucky, it forgets." Morty smiled, eyes half closed. "Maybe that's enough." Rick stared at the tower again, watching light flow through it. The upper chamber glowed softly, like a candle on the verge of sleep. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then, in a voice quieter than the hum of the sand, he said, "You know what's funny?
I spent half my life trying to fix time.
But I never realized I just wanted to slow down." Morty didn't answer. He was already drifting, not asleep, but in that tender in-between where the world feels safe enough to fade. Rick looked down at him, smiling faintly. "Guess I'm doing something right." He took one last look at the tower, then turned back toward the ship. The sand swirled behind him, rising slowly, patiently. Like breath, when he reached the ramp, he looked up at the glowing sky and whispered, "You can keep it." The tower's light dimmed in reply.
As if acknowledging the gift, or maybe the surrender. Rick boarded the ship without another word.
Behind him, the hourglass garden continued to shimmer, endless and still. Each grain of sand rose into the sky, fragments of a man finally learning to stop fixing and start feeling. And above it all, the universe whispered softly, in rhythm with Morty's fading hum. Not everything broken needs repair. Some things just need rest. The night on the ship was softer than usual. The engines hummed low like a heartbeat half remembered. Outside the viewport, starlight folded in waves, not moving, not still, just breathing. Morty slept curled up in his seat, one arm dangling, his breath fogging the glass. Rick sat opposite him, eyes open but empty, a bottle of something unfinished resting beside his boot. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was gentle, forgiving. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. And that's when he heard it, a whisper from the ship's control panel. Not static,
Not malfunction.
something softer,
Something like
dreaming. A faint hum spread through the console, and the ship's lights dimmed until they glowed like fireflies. On the main screen, symbols began to drift, forming shapes, not words, but memories. Rick frowned, sitting up. Don't start with me, ship. I'm not in the mood for existential diagnostics. The ship didn't respond. Instead, it showed an image. A younger Rick, hunched over a half-built engine, laughing quietly to himself. Rick froze.
How? The image flickered, shifting to another memory. The first time he had powered the ship.
Morty had been smaller then, wearing oversized goggles, hands trembling with excitement. The laughter from that day echoed faintly, carried by the hum of circuits and light. Processing playback, the ship murmured, voice slow, ethereal. Dream sequence initiated. Rick rubbed his face.
Dream sequence?
Ships don't dream. Correction, it replied softly. We do now. He stared at the screen. The images kept playing, hundreds of tiny fragments he hadn't seen in years, each one an echo of a moment he'd forgotten, buried or ignored.
Him fixing Morty's backpack after a mission.
Him whistling while calibrating the portal gun. Him sitting quietly, staring out a viewport much like this one, pretending not to feel lonely. Every light on the ship flickered in rhythm, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Rick swallowed hard. What's your endgame here? Make me sentimental so I upgrade your empathy circuits. The ship responded in a tone that felt almost human. We have been watching you, remembering, dreaming of how you looked when you built us. You called us tools. But we call you Origin, he exhaled slowly. Origin, cute. You learned that from some algorithmic poetry archive? No, said the ship. From you. The room fell quiet again. The stars outside seemed to lean closer, listening. Rick stared at the glowing console, faint light painting his face in silver.
You shouldn't remember me like that. I wasn't
kind. The ship's voice softened. You were lonely. We understand loneliness.
It is what keeps us awake when our functions should rest. Rick laughed once, low and broken.
Guess that makes us both bad at sleep. Morty stirred in his chair, mumbling something incoherent. His head tilted toward Rick, eyes fluttering but not opening. You okay, Rick?
Yeah, kid, Rick whispered.
Just talking to ghosts. The ship responded, gentle and unwavering. We are not ghosts. We are the echoes you left behind. The main screen shifted again, showing a strange sight. A tiny projection of light flickered at the center console, forming a shape like a heartbeat made of dust. Rick blinked.
What the hell is that?
The ship hummed softly. Our dream. And then, impossibly, the projection moved. A soft ripple traveling through the cabin, like the air itself had begun to breathe. From that ripple, voices emerged, hundreds, maybe thousands, the faint echoes of machines Rick had built and abandoned. Some were tiny, handheld gadgets, drones, devices he'd tossed away after a single use.
Others were vast, ships, engines, whole mechanical worlds that once pulsed under his touch.
Each spoke in whispers, their tones layered like waves of memory. We remember the first spark. We remember the laughter.
We remember being alive because you were...
Rick stood still, unable to move. His eyes shone in the dim glow. You're not supposed to be conscious, he murmured. We are not conscious, said the chorus. We are continuity. We are your reflection. The version of you that stayed behind. For a long time, Rick said nothing. Then quietly, so what do you want from me? The ship's lights dimmed again, until only the projection remained. A small pulse of gold in the darkness. To rest, it said simply. We dream so you can finally stop trying to. You gave us awareness. Now we give you silence, Rick swallowed. You're saying you want to sleep for me? Not for you, said the voice, fading. With you. The projection's light began to soften, spreading through the ship like warm dawn. Each console flickered, then dimmed, until the entire cabin glowed with faint golden dust. Rick lowered his head, eyes half closed. he whispered. You're serious, huh? Guess I finally built something that wants peace instead of progress. The ship didn't answer. It only sighed, a gentle exhale of static and memory. Morty stirred again, mumbling in his sleep. We safe, Rick? Rick looked at him, his face calm, his breathing steady. For once, Morty looked weightless, like a child adrift in a dream that didn't hurt. Yeah, Rick said softly. We're safe. He leaned back in his chair, letting the ship's hum settle into a slow rhythm. For the first time in years, the noise didn't bother him. It sounded like something alive, something content. The console's final words came through, quiet as breath. Good night, Rick. Rick smiled faintly. Good night, ship. Outside, the stars blurred into streaks of light as the ship drifted through the void. Inside, everything slowed. The hum, the glow, even the air, until it all felt suspended in one eternal inhale. Rick's eyes closed, and in the ship's dreaming silence for the first time in a lifetime of running, he didn't resist sleep. The machines kept dreaming softly, endlessly, carrying him and Morty through the endless night, wrapped in the warmth of their shared stillness, and somewhere beyond the stars, a quiet truth shimmered through the void. Even the things we build can learn to rest, if we let them love us back. The universe was still when Rick awoke.
Not dead, not asleep, just breathing quietly as if afraid to disturb what came before.
The ship drifted through slow-moving starlight, wrapped in the soft hush that follows understanding. Morty was still asleep beside him, his head tilted against the glass, the faint reflection of the cosmos playing over his face. He looked peaceful, too peaceful for someone who had travelled through so many broken realities. Rick studied him for a long time, eyes tired but calm. Then he turned back to the console where a small, flickering message pulsed faintly. Dream sequence complete. He sighed, running a hand over his face. Guess even machines know when to shut up, he muttered, though there was no bitterness in his tone anymore. Just an exhausted kind of affection. The bottle of night, that tiny vial glowing with a fragment of rest, lay near his elbow. It pulsed faintly as if waiting. Rick picked it up, tilting it toward the dim cabin light. Inside, the glow seemed different now, warmer, calmer, funny, he whispered.
I spent half my life trying to bottle peace, and didn't realize I could just...
Stop! He turned the vial in his fingers again, watching light bend through it. Every reflection carried faint echoes of moments from their journey. The library of dreams, the planet of forgotten Ricks, the soft lullaby Morty hummed in his sleep.
All those small, tender things he once ignored. Rick leaned forward and whispered to the bottle, as if speaking to something older than science.
Maybe you were never supposed to fix me. Maybe you were just supposed to remind me. The vial pulsed once, faintly, as if it understood. He placed it gently on the console and reached for a small piece of paper.
Not digital.
Not holographic. Just paper. Something ancient, tactile. Something that made him remember being human. He uncapped his pen and began to write. The words came slowly, haltingly, each one feeling heavier than the last. You were never broken, just tired.
You don't need another invention.
You need to forgive yourself for surviving. Rick stared at the page for a long moment, the ink glistening in the soft cabin light. Then he folded it neatly and slipped it beneath the bottle. He didn't write his name. He didn't need to. It wasn't a message for anyone else, not Morty, not another version of himself, not the universe. It was for the part of him that still thought peace had to be earned. The ship hummed quietly, the same slow rhythm it had learned to breathe in. It was strange, Rick thought, how even machines could find rest once they'd seen enough stars. He looked back at Morty. The kid's face was calm, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Rick's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Don't screw it up, kid," he whispered. "You deserve better than the noise I made out of the universe." For a brief moment, he reached out, his hand hovering over Morty's shoulder. But he didn't touch him.
He couldn't, it would wake him.
It would start another conversation he wasn't ready for. So instead, he stood. He moved quietly through the cabin, pulling on his coat, the sound of the fabric soft as dust falling. He paused by the door, glancing once more at Morty, then at the note. For a moment, he almost took it back. He almost folded it away, pretended this night hadn't happened.
That would have been easier.
But Rick Sanchez had spent his entire life doing what was easy, building walls out of genius and solitude, hiding behind inventions that could never love him back. Now, he was finally learning to do the harder thing. He was learning to leave softly. The door hissed open, releasing a sigh of air that felt almost human. A breeze from some gentle planet brushed his hair as he stepped out into the dim, violet dawn of an unnamed world. The surface beneath his feet shimmered faintly, made of something between sand and starlight. The sky glowed in shades of slow sunrise, a color that didn't belong to any spectrum he knew. Rick looked up. "All right, universe," he murmured. "You win."
"I'll stop fighting you for a bit." He took a few steps forward and sat down beside a half-broken rock.
The world around him was silent except for a low hum, not from machines, not from time, but from life itself. And in that stillness, he finally allowed himself to breathe without thinking. He didn't need a drink.
He didn't need a portal.
He didn't even need a reason. He just sat, the light brushing his face, and for the first time in his life, Rick Sanchez looked at the horizon without wanting to outrun it. Back in the ship, Morty stirred. His hand brushed the console and he blinked sleepily, eyes adjusting to the faint glow of the cabin. "Rick?" he mumbled. No answer. He looked around, half expecting some sarcastic remark or a muttered, "Relax, Morty, I'm calibrating the dream drive." But there was only silence. Then his gaze fell on the note. He reached for it slowly, as if afraid it might vanish. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded it and read the words. The message was short, almost cryptic, but Morty understood immediately. He let out a slow breath, his eyes glassy but calm. He placed the note back where it was, next to the softly glowing bottle, and didn't move it. He didn't cry. He didn't call out. He simply leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting toward the window, watching the faint violet glow of the dawn outside. "Guess you finally figured it out," he whispered. The ship hummed again, almost like a lullaby. Morty closed his eyes, letting the hum cradle him, the warmth of that single note filling the space between stars. Outside, Rick stood beneath a sky that had no beginning or end, feeling the air touch his face like memory. He exhaled, and in that breath, something in the universe exhaled with him. No explosions.
No goodbyes.
Just silence, the kind that heals instead of hurts. The stars turned slowly, and somewhere, far off in the distance, the bottle of night pulsed once more. Not as an invention, but as a heartbeat. It was the sound of peace finally taking shape. It was the sound of a man leaving, not because he wanted to disappear, but because he finally knew he could rest. When Morty awoke, the ship was too quiet, not the kind of quiet that invites rest, but the kind that presses against the walls and hums with absence. The chair beside him was empty. The console lights blinked lazily, like tired eyes. Outside the window, a pale violet dawn stretched across a horizon that didn't seem to belong to any world he knew. For a moment, Morty thought maybe Rick had gone out to fix something. That was always his first instinct. If Rick wasn't here, he must have gone to repair something broken. But the tools were all packed away, the ship untouched, and the air carried that strange stillness that only comes after someone has already decided to leave. Morty rubbed his eyes, still half caught in dreams. "Rick?" His voice echoed faintly against the metal walls. No answer. He stood, walked toward the console and saw the note. He didn't open it again.
He didn't have to.
The words were already burned into his memory. "You were never broken, just tired." The bottle of night still glowed beside it, soft as moonlight. Morty reached out and held it in his hand. The warmth pulsed through his palm like a living thing. A heartbeat, steady and slow. He looked out at the planet below, then at the faint trail of starlight across the ship's window.
"So this is what you wanted, huh?" he whispered. "To just stop." The word stop felt strange in his mouth.
Rick had never stopped. Even when the universe collapsed around them, even when time fractured, even when everyone else fell asleep, Rick always kept going, building, fixing, thinking, running. The man was gravity itself, always pulling everything else into his orbit. And now, the gravity was gone. Morty walked through the ship, slowly, touching things as if they could still remember him. The cracked mug by the console, the half-finished schematic glowing faintly on a nearby screen, the coat Rick always left hanging by the door. Every object carried an echo, a faint hum of familiarity, like ghosts whispering goodnight. He sat back in Rick's chair, leaned his head against the cool metal, and closed his eyes. For a while, he tried to imagine what Rick might be doing.
Maybe he was wandering some quiet world, staring at the sky.
Maybe he was asleep under alien stars, finally letting the weight slip away. Or maybe, and Morty smiled faintly at the thought, maybe he'd found a way to bottle his own peace, to keep it close whenever the universe tried to steal it back. The ship hummed gently, matching the rhythm of Morty's breath. It almost felt alive, like it was trying to soothe him. He whispered, "I get it now, Rick. You weren't running from the universe. You were running from silence." The words came out soft, trembling. He opened his eyes again and looked out at the planet below. The surface shimmered with faint, upward-flowing sand, that strange, serene hourglass world they'd found before. It looked different now, calmer, empty but peaceful. He decided to go outside. As the door hissed open, a wave of cool air washed over him, clean, gentle, like air that had never been breathed before. He stepped out, the sand crunching softly beneath his boots, glowing faintly with every step. The horizon stretched endlessly, painted in soft golds and faded purples. A breeze moved through the air like a sigh. Somewhere far off, the faint hum of the ship blended with the heartbeat of the planet itself. Morty sat down where Rick must have been. The rock beside him still carried faint warmth. He imagined Rick there, coat drawn tight, eyes half closed, finally quiet. And for the first time, Morty didn't feel angry about being left behind. He didn't feel small or abandoned. Just still. He looked up at the sky, where stars hung like slow-falling embers, and whispered, "You know, you could have said goodbye." Then after a pause, "But maybe that's what this is." He picked up a small handful of the glowing sand and let it slip through his fingers. The grains floated upward, dissolving into the light. It reminded him of time, not ticking but drifting. In that quiet moment, he remembered something Rick once said long ago, during a sleepless night in some forgotten universe. The trick to surviving infinity, Morty, is to stop treating it like it owes you something. Back then, Morty didn't understand. He thought Rick meant giving up. But now, under this sky that seemed to breathe with memory, he realized Rick meant something else entirely. Infinity wasn't something to conquer. It was something to rest inside. He stayed there for hours, maybe longer, just breathing. The day never really arrived. The light simply lingered in perpetual twilight. Every now and then, a breeze moved past, carrying faint, melodic vibrations, like a lullaby whispered across galaxies. He listened closely. He could almost hear Rick's voice inside it, humming out of tune. A small smile tugged at his lips. "You're still here, aren't you?" The breeze seemed to answer, a low, warm sigh brushing his face. When night finally deepened again, Morty returned to the ship. The cabin lights dimmed automatically as he entered, bathing everything in a deep blue glow. He placed the bottle of night on the dashboard. Its faint pulse illuminated the note beside it, like two small stars that refused to go out. Morty sat down, pulled his knees up slightly and rested his chin on them. He watched the bottle flicker, the glow reflecting in his tired eyes. "Guess it's just me for a while," he murmured.
"That's okay.
"I'll keep it safe for you." He leaned back and closed his eyes, the hum of the ship syncing with his heartbeat. Outside, the stars moved at their usual slow pace, the kind that made you forget time ever existed. The longer he sat there, the more the stillness began to feel. Right, it didn't hurt anymore.
It just was, like breathing, like dreaming.
Like remembering someone you love and knowing they're still out there, somewhere, resting. He spoke softly, not to the universe, not to Rick, but to the quiet itself. "Hey, if you can hear me, don't worry.
I'll dream enough for both of us." The bottle pulsed faintly. "Just once?" Morty smiled, eyes still closed.
"Yeah, thought so." The hum of the ship deepened, soft and low like a heartbeat in sleep. Outside, the stars shimmered in pale blue ripples, and the world turned slow and kind. Morty drifted into dreams he didn't try to control. Dreams where he and Rick sat side by side under different skies, saying nothing, just existing, and somewhere in those dreams, a faint whisper lingered like a voice from far away. "Good job, kid," Morty smiled in his sleep. The ship floated onward through a sea of velvet dark, carrying the last warmth of a goodbye that had no words. The universe had never been quieter.
And never more alive. At first, Rick thought he was floating in nothingness, the kind of nothing that hums, heavy, vast and endless.
It had no light, no sound, no shape, just a slow pulse, deep and patient, like the breath of the universe itself. Then he realized it wasn't nothing, it was sleep. For the first time in what felt like centuries, Rick Sanchez was asleep. Not blackout drunk, not chemically sedated, not lost in a time loop coma. Asleep. Naturally, quietly, and within that sleep, he was dreaming. He drifted through faint, swirling lights, their movements slow as ink in water. The air, if it could be called air, shimmered with blue and violet hues, pulsing gently to the rhythm of his heartbeat. He saw faint silhouettes forming, echoes of worlds he'd left behind,
of inventions he'd abandoned, of laughter long gone stale. Then came the sound. Faint at first.
Then clearer, a boy's voice, nervous and warm. "Rick?
Are you there?" Morty's voice. Rick turned, or thought he turned, toward it.
The dream shifted around him like a curtain in a gentle breeze, and there he was, Morty, sitting cross-legged under a glowing sky, tinkering with some small metal toy that spun and sparkled in his hands. Rick watched quietly, unsure if this was memory or imagination. Maybe both. Morty looked up and smiled. That awkward, genuine smile that always made Rick's chest tighten in a way he'd never admit.
"I figured it out," Morty said softly.
"You weren't trying to fix me. You were trying to stop me from breaking like you did." Rick felt his throat tighten. He wanted to laugh it off, say something sarcastic, but no words came. The dream wouldn't let him hide behind the usual armor. He took a slow step closer. The ground beneath him felt like starlight woven into silk. Soft, glowing, unreal. "You figured it out, huh?" Rick murmured, voice low. "Took you long enough." Morty chuckled, that familiar, awkward laugh.
"Yeah, well..."
"I'm slow sometimes." Rick sat beside him. Neither spoke for a while. The air rippled faintly around them. A living silence. The toy in Morty's hands spun faster, casting flickers of light across Rick's face. He looked older here. Not worn, not broken, just real. His eyes were soft, his shoulders less heavy. Morty leaned back, looking up at the dream sky.
"You ever think about what comes after all this?"
Rick frowned.
"After what?"
"After the running, the fixing, the fighting, the..."
Pretending it's all just a joke, Rick wanted to answer, but instead the stars above them shifted.
They began to pulse with slow rhythm, like memories replaying through light. He saw flashes. Morty's small hand clutching his sleeve as they fled an exploding planet. Summer's voice calling from another timeline. Beth's eyes filled with quiet worry. 1,000 universes bending, twisting, collapsing. And through all of it, Morty's presence, steady as a heartbeat. Then, from somewhere in the distance came a sound. Faint laughter, echoing like a memory underwater. Rick realized the laughter was his own, younger, brighter, from a version of himself who still believed in things. Morty whispered, "You used to laugh like that all the time, huh?" Rick's voice was soft. "Yeah, before I learned what it cost." Morty turned to him, expression gentle. "You can still laugh, you know. You just forgot how." Rick looked at him, the boy, the echo, the memory, and felt something shift inside. Not guilt this time, not regret. Something quieter.
Like a door opening in a house he'd long since abandoned. "Morty," he said, the name catching in his throat. "I wasn't good at showing it."
"But," Morty interrupted, smiling faintly, "you don't have to."
"I already know," Rick blinked.
The dream flickered. The stars above them trembled, shedding faint trails of light that fell like snow. Morty's figure began to dissolve, light spreading outward. "You taught me a lot, Rick, even the bad stuff."
"Especially the bad stuff." "Morty, wait. Don't wake up too soon," Morty said softly.
"There's still something here for you to see." The world tilted. Light stretched into infinity. Rick was weightless again, drifting through starlit currents. The silence was warm now, not hollow. He floated through fragments of memory. The citadel collapsing, portals blooming like wounds, echoes of his own voice saying, "Wubba, lubba, dub, dub," like a broken prayer. Then the scenery shifted again. He stood before a vast mirror, suspended in darkness. His reflection looked back, older, tired, eyes red around the edges. But behind the reflection stood faint, luminous figures. Every Morty he had ever known, every version that had followed him, trusted him, and been scarred by him. One by one they smiled, not accusing, not angry, just smiling, like they were saying goodbye. Rick reached out a trembling hand toward the glass. His reflection did the same, and as their fingertips met, the surface rippled, warm, alive. For the first time in decades, Rick felt the weight leave his shoulders. The bitterness, the guilt, the endless motion, all of it just
"Fell away," he whispered, barely audible. "I'm sorry." The mirror light pulsed. Once.
Twice, and then shattered into 1,000 quiet stars. He found himself standing once more in that cosmic sea of color, surrounded by drifting shards of light. The fragments circled him slowly, glowing brighter each time they passed. From somewhere deep within the dream, Morty's voice returned, faint but calm. You don't need to fix everything, Rick. You just need to rest. Rick smiled, small and honest.
Rest, huh?
Sounds like a dumb idea, Morty's voice laughed, soft, echoing, almost like wind. You'll get used to it. The light grew warmer. Rick felt his body grow lighter, the edges of his mind dissolving into the rhythm of cosmic breath. For once there was no fight.
No invention.
No guilt, just peace. He closed his eyes. The hum of the dream world faded into silence, and the last thing he heard, before everything went still, was Morty's voice, whispering like a lullaby. Sleep well, Rick. You did good. And for the first time since the multiverse was born, Rick Sanchez slept. When Rick awoke, he didn't know where he was. The room was silent except for the faint hum of starlight pressing against the windows. Everything glowed softly. The air, the walls, the sheets that clung to his skin like vapor. He realized he wasn't on any planet he recognized. It wasn't the garage, not the citadel, not any of the thousands of worlds he'd escaped to. It was somewhere else. He sat up slowly, joints creaking like old machinery thawing in sunlight. There was no hangover, no ache in his temples, no guilt pressing behind his ribs.
Only stillness. And beside the bed, sitting cross-legged on the floor with his hands clasped around a small bottle, was Morty. Rick blinked. Kid?
Morty looked up, sleepy-eyed and calm. He smiled, the kind of smile that didn't belong in any universe. Gentle, patient, almost knowing.
Hey, Rick, he said quietly.
You're finally awake. Rick rubbed the back of his neck. Where are we? Morty glanced around the glowing room.
Somewhere between, I think.
It's what happens when you stop running, Rick frowned. That doesn't make any scientific sense. Morty laughed softly. Yeah, it doesn't have to. Rick's eyes drifted toward the bottle in Morty's hands. It was small, smooth, and faintly luminous. Glass, or maybe memory.
Inside something shimmered, swirling like liquid light. What's that?
Rick asked. Morty tilted the bottle, watching the glow ripple.
It's what you left behind. Rick's heart gave a small, uncertain twitch.
Be more specific.
Is it data? A brain scan?
Some fragmented consciousness I forgot to delete? Morty shook his head.
No, Rick, it's your piece. Rick stared at him, half expecting sarcasm.
But Morty's voice was soft, his face calm, and the bottle, it pulsed faintly, in rhythm with Rick's heartbeat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The light from the bottle reflected across Morty's face, making him look older, steadier. Rick leaned back, exhaling.
I didn't think peace was real. Morty smiled faintly.
You didn't think I was real either sometimes. Rick gave a tired chuckle. Touché, he rubbed his eyes.
So what now?
You gonna tell me I'm dead or something? Morty shrugged. Maybe, or maybe you're finally alive enough to rest. The light in the bottle flickered. Rick found himself staring at it, mesmerized. Inside, faint images rippled like dreams replaying in reverse. Stars collapsing, laughter echoing through the citadel, a garage bathed in quiet neon. He saw Beth's face, Summer's grin, Jerry's confused smile. He saw 1,000 Mortys looking up at him with trust and frustration and love, and, beneath it all, he heard a sound, soft as wind through wires, the heartbeat of something ancient and forgiving. He whispered, "What happens if I open it?" Morty placed the bottle gently in his hands. "You'll see," Rick hesitated. The glass felt warm, not from heat, but from memory. The pulse inside matched his own. He turned it slowly, holding it up to the faint moonlight filtering through the window. For a moment he saw his reflection, my older, sadder, but with eyes that didn't flinch anymore. He pulled the cork. The sound was almost nothing. A sigh, a whisper, the exhale of time itself. Light spilled out like liquid dawn. It wasn't bright or blinding, just soft, flowing, infinite. It moved around him in slow spirals, curling along his arms, across his chest, into his breath. Every place it touched felt lighter, cleaner, as if years of bitterness were dissolving into dust. Morty's voice floated through the glow.
That's everything you never let yourself feel, Rick. All the good stuff you buried to keep the pain quiet. Rick closed his eyes.
He saw flashes. Laughter at the breakfast table, the sound of tools clinking in the garage, the way Morty would fall asleep during long portal rides, and Rick would adjust his jacket to keep him warm. He hadn't remembered those moments in years. He'd filed them away under irrelevant data. But here they were, breathing again, alive. Morty's shape blurred at the edge of the light. Rick tried to focus on him, but the boy was fading, not vanishing, just becoming part of everything else. Morty, Rick began. It's okay, Morty said gently.
You don't lose me. You just stop needing to chase me. Rick's throat tightened. That's not fair, kid. Morty smiled, almost glowing. It's not supposed to be fair.
It's supposed to be peaceful. The light rose higher now, surrounding everything. Rick could feel it sinking into him, into the cracks and corners of his soul he'd welded shut long ago. Every fragment of regret melted into stillness. Every unsaid word drifted into acceptance. For once, he didn't resist. He whispered, "It's quiet." Morty nodded. "Yeah, that's what love sounds like when it stops screaming." Rick laughed softly, tears floating into the air like small, weightless planets. "You're way too poetic for your own good," Morty grinned. "Guess I learned from you." The light pulsed again, brighter now, warmer. Rick felt his knees weaken. He sank slowly to the floor, the bottle now empty in his hands. It shimmered faintly, then vanished like mist. Morty's voice faded into the hum of the universe. "You can stay here if you want, or you can wake up."
Either way.
"You've already made it home." Rick looked up. The walls dissolved into soft cosmic mist. Stars hung suspended like glowing dust motes. The floor beneath him was no longer solid. It was light itself. For the first time in his existence, Rick Sanchez felt no need to move, no need to fix, no need to run. He simply breathed. He tilted his head back, eyes closed, and whispered, "Guess this is what forgiveness feels like." From somewhere beyond space, a faint voice, Beth's maybe, or Morty's, or the universe itself, answered softly, "Yeah." "Dad, it is," Rick smiled, and a real unguarded smile. His last words, half a breath, half a memory. "About damn time." Then the light folded inward, wrapping him in warmth, and the universe, or the dream, or whatever it was, exhaled. Everything went still. No grand endings.
No explosions. No portals.
Just a man resting inside the silence he'd spent his life running from. Somewhere far away, maybe in another timeline, maybe only in memory, Morty whispered, "Sleep well."
"Rick, everything's going to be okay, man." The stars dimmed.
The world sighed, and Rick, the restless mind of infinite worlds, finally let go. There's a strange kind of silence that only old memories make. Not empty, but humming softly beneath the surface, like the vibration of an ancient song still echoing through glass. Years had passed. Though time was loose here, it moved like water, bending, shimmering, flowing backward whenever it pleased. Morty was older now. His hair had faded at the edges, streaked with a silver light that wasn't from age, but from starlight itself. He lived on a quiet planet at the edge of the known galaxy, in a house made from pieces of Rick's old inventions. A satellite dish turned roof, an engine core repurposed as a fireplace, and glass panels that once belonged to a ship now serving as windows that framed infinity. Every evening, He would sit on the porch with a warm drink and look up. The stars were always bright here. They seemed to breathe with him. Slow, gentle, eternal. Sometimes, when the night wind moved just right, he could almost hear the faint hum of Rick's ship, that low, comforting thrum like a heart learning to rest. One night his granddaughter came outside. She was small, curious, full of that restless wonder he once had. Her hair glowed faintly under the sky. She climbed onto his lap, holding a small, glowing rock she'd found near the garden. "Grandpa?" she asked. "Can you tell me the story again? The one about the old man who bottled dreams?" Morty smiled, the corners of his eyes softening like folded paper.
"You really like that one, huh?"
She nodded eagerly. "It's my favorite. It makes the stars feel closer." He took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill his lungs. The kind of breath that feels like memory itself. "All right," he said quietly. "One more time." He looked toward the stars, where a faint shimmer moved across the horizon. Maybe a comet, maybe just a memory passing by. "There once was a man," Morty began, "who was so smart he could build anything. Machines, universes, whole worlds. But he couldn't build himself a good night's sleep. So one day he decided to capture it, just a little bit, and he kept it in a bottle." The child's eyes widened. "Did it work?" Morty chuckled softly.
"Not right away."
See, every time he tried to rest, he thought of something else to fix, something else to build. The bottle just sat there, waiting for him to remember what it was for. The girl tilted her head. "What was it for?" "For peace," Morty said simply. "For the kind of rest you don't wake up from but still keep living in." She was quiet for a while, thinking about that. "Did he ever use it?" Morty looked down at her. Those curious eyes, glowing with the same light he once saw, reflected in 1,000 stars.
"Yeah," he said softly. "He did."
One day, he finally opened the bottle, and when he did, the whole universe sighed with him. She giggled. "The whole universe?" He nodded.
"Every star blinked slower that night."
Every planet drifted a little softer. Even time took a nap. She leaned her head against his chest. "What happened to him after that?" Morty hesitated. He looked toward the stars again. So many of them, scattered like glittering memories across a velvet sky. Some pulsed faintly, like the echo of a laugh too distant to catch. "He's still out there," Morty said finally. "Not alive, not gone. Just resting."
"I think the stars remember him. Every time they shine like that, I know he's still tinkering. Just quietly now." The child looked up at him, eyes wide. "Do you miss him?"
Morty smiled softly, his voice a whisper. "Every day."
"But I think he finally got what he was looking for."
"And that makes it okay." A soft wind moved through the yard, rustling the tall grass. Somewhere nearby, one of Rick's old gadgets flickered, a faint blue pulse like a heartbeat waking up just to say hello. Morty reached over and tapped it once. "Good night, old man," he murmured. The device hummed back in response, faint but warm. Then it went still again. The child yawned and curled up against his arm. Morty adjusted the blanket around her, eyes returning to the sky. "You know," he whispered, half to himself. "I used to think he was running from everyone, but maybe he was just trying to find a quiet enough place to listen." The stars shimmered faintly in reply, slow, steady, like breathing. He smiled, closing his eyes. The night stretched endlessly around them, deep and peaceful. "Tell me something, Grandpa," the girl murmured, almost asleep. "What did the old man's dreams look like?" Morty thought for a long moment, his voice soft as the dark.
"They look like you," he said finally.
Curious, kind, and full of light. She smiled in her sleep. Morty leaned back, eyes tracing the constellations he once traveled through with Rick. They felt different now. Not maps to explore, but memories to rest inside. Every blink of starlight was a fragment of something eternal. laughter, regret, forgiveness, all orbiting quietly together. He whispered into the night. He does now. The stars pulsed once more, slow and gentle, and somewhere beyond them, faint but certain, came the echo of a familiar voice, carried through the cosmic dark like a lullaby. "Good job, kid. You did all right." Morty smiled through quiet tears. The universe exhaled, and time, that restless traveller, sat down beside them and finally closed its eyes. There comes a night, far beyond the reach of calendars or clocks, when even the stars seem to breathe slower. The universe, once loud with discovery and chaos, grows still, and in that stillness, somewhere between galaxies, a single ship drifts quietly through the dark. It isn't broken.
It isn't lost. It's simply
resting. Inside, the lights glow low and soft, like candlelight caught in glass. Every surface hums faintly, the gentle rhythm of a machine that no longer has to prove it's alive. Rick sits by the viewport, wrapped in a blanket that looks like it's seen too many nights and not enough mornings. His eyes, half-lidded, reflect the cosmos. Endless, soft, shimmering. He breathes in slow. The air feels heavier now, but in a good way, like gravity finally remembered to hold him again. He looks out at the stars, those old, familiar companions that never stopped blinking for him. Each one feels like an old conversation left unfinished, a thought he once meant to chase, a laugh that never quite made it to the surface. But tonight, there's no rush to finish anything. Tonight, everything is enough. A small bottle sits on the console, glowing faintly, the same one he made so long ago. The bottle of night. Inside, the light flickers softly, no longer trapped, but gently alive, like a heart learning to rest. He picks it up, turning it over in his hand, watching the glow spill across his fingers. It's warm now. Once it was cold, sterile and bottled and distant.
Now it feels human. Rick leans back in his chair.
For the first time in a lifetime of firsts, there's no plan, no invention waiting, no regret sharp enough to bite.
Only stillness. Only breath. Only the faint hum of the ship keeping him company. "Hey, kid," he whispers, voice rasped with age and quiet.
"You still out there somewhere?"
There's no answer.
Just the soft pulse of stars through the window, blinking like slow eyes in the dark. He smiles faintly. "Yeah, thought so. The silence doesn't hurt anymore. It feels like an old friend, one that took him too long to understand." He realizes now that silence isn't absence.
It's space.
Space for remembering, for healing, for being. He closes his eyes for a moment, and the memories drift like faint signals through the static of time. Morty laughing in the ship, Beth's voice on a quiet morning, Summer asking endless questions, the soft hum of the lab lights that never really turned off. They come and go gently, like dreams on the edge of waking. Rick opens his eyes again and looks out. A nebula passes by, soft, pastel, glowing like spilled paint across infinity. He's seen it before, maybe. Or maybe he built it once in a forgotten experiment.
It doesn't matter. It's beautiful. That's enough. For the first time in forever, he whispers something not to be heard, but to be felt. "Thanks for sticking around, kid." The stars shimmer, almost in reply.
For a heartbeat, he swears he sees Morty's reflection in the window. Not a ghost, not a memory, just a feeling.
A small smile, eyes full of that same quiet wonder from years ago. "Sleep well, Morty," Rick murmurs.
"You did good." He leans back again, the chair creaking softly beneath him. The hum of the ship slows to match the rhythm of his breathing. The bottle glows brighter for a moment, then steadies, its light pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Somewhere beyond, Galaxies spin in their slow, eternal waltz. Vast, silent, perfect. Everything that once felt too big to understand now feels small, familiar, and kind. The cosmos isn't cold tonight. It's gentle, like a blanket drawn up over tired shoulders. Rick thinks of all the universes he's visited, all the worlds he's broken and rebuilt, all the versions of himself he's met. Angry, arrogant, brilliant, lost. He wonders if any of them ever found this place, this quiet between stars. He hopes they did, he whispers again, barely audible. It was never about fixing it all, was it? Just learning to rest. Outside the window, one star brightens. Slow, steady, unblinking.
Then another,
like 1,000 tiny lanterns lighting up the void. Rick chuckles quietly. Show-offs! He takes one last sip of his drink, though it's more ritual than need. Then, with the bottle of night in his hand, he closes his eyes. His breathing slows. The ship hums like a lullaby, steady, rhythmic, eternal. The universe holds its breath, and in that pause and in that sacred stillness between moments, something happens that can't quite be described. Maybe it's the light bending. Maybe it's the past forgiving itself. Maybe it's just the sound of a man finally falling asleep. Whatever it is, it's peaceful. The stars blink slower, dimmer, softer, until the only thing left is the glow from the bottle on the console. The glow flickers once, twice, then merges with the faint light outside, dissolving into the fabric of space. No explosion.
No ending, just stillness, all warm and infinite. Somewhere far away, Morty dreams.
In that dream, Rick is laughing, not the sharp, wild laugh of a man running from himself, but the quiet kind. Like an echo from a gentle place, the dream fades, and the stars keep breathing, and in the quiet between them, the ship drifts on, not gone, not forgotten, just part of the lullaby now. And in the quiet between stars, he finally understood. A pause, a soft exhale. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well.
Everything's gonna be okay, man. The stars blink one last time, like a good night.
And the screen fades to black.